to Carol's Journey. We have a very, very exciting show today, and we have information about a little-known celebration. Today, I am honored to have our guest, Dr. John Norvell. Dr. John Norvell is the founder and director of the African American Pinkster Committee of New York. We will go into a conversation. We're going to have a conversation about Pinkster. Welcome, Dr. John Norvell.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor.
Okay. Can you tell us something about your expertise on the subject? Give us a little bit of history about you,
Yes.
for our audience.
Yes, well, I'm basically what you call a CUNY brat. I went to City College, and Brooklyn College my first year, and then I transferred to City College, and went through the programs there, and I ended up working my doctoral work at the CUNY Graduate Center. And CUNY is a very, very excellent school, very excellent university system. And I had my choice. I could have gone to Harvard or Princeton or the others, but I preferred to go to City University. And I don't have any regrets about that at all. In doing my dissertation work, I was working on the music of Mary Lou Williams, who was a famous jazz artist, and she became a Catholic convert, and so she started writing jazz masses. And this was at the time of Vatican II, what is known as the Second Vatican Council, so it was a time that was apropos for writing music that was music more the vernacular. And as I was doing research, when you do research and things, you have to go all the way back. I was trying to find, was she the first African American to write Catholic masses, and who were the others, if there were any others in that. And going back into the history, I stumbled over this celebration that was in the African American past that was little known. It was called Pinkster. And it was in this book, The Music of Black Americans, A History by Eileen Southern. She has written, literally, we call it the Bible of African American music history. She was a professor at Queens College, the late Eileen Southern. And she talked about Pinkster and the celebration of people who were Angolans and that. And I said, what is this? In New York. And I said, what is this Pinkster stuff? And she had several pages of the celebration. She also edited an eyewitness of the celebration, a man named James Yates. He had written, he had been interviewed back in the 1850s, right. And he was already an octogenarian. So he had seen the celebration. He was a boy during the 1770s. And so she was, seeing how far back this story went, Pinkster. So I became interested. And what happened was, at that same time, they had rediscovered the African burial ground. And we had professors in that, Dr. Blakely and others, come to the Graduate Center. He was asking if there were students who were interested in doing more research in that. And I thought, wait a minute, could there be possibly some musical instruments buried in the ground people wouldn't know about? Maybe something that was a piece of bone that was a flute, or a piece of wood that might have belonged to a string instrument or a drum. And so I was interested. And what happened was there was a parallel project that was taking place, and that was in another little-known historical spot called Seneca Village, which was the first African-American village that was made for African-American folks past the city limits. Seneca Village is what is now Central Park. And so I worked with a Dr. Cynthia Copeland at Central Park, Seneca Village, and it was there that she decided she was going to recreate what the village looked like in the 1830s and 40s. Mm-hmm. And that she said, well, we're going to have Pinkster at Seneca Village. And she was working at the time with the New York Historical Society with the excavation of the area and that. And so we set up sets of what Seneca Village at Pinkster time might have looked like. And that's when I really became really involved in the history of Pinkster, and that because it was at that time, it was the 200th anniversary of Mother Zion Church, and Mother Zion had a church there in Seneca Village, and Mother Zion had a fire, and they didn't know about that earlier history. But we had newspaper clippings and everything of that earlier church, and so we brought it to Mother Zion, and they were amazed. They were shocked. They said, "You found our history for us on the 200th anniversary." So they came down to celebrate Pinkster with us, and everybody was moved. They rededicated the ground there in Central Park. And so I saw the importance of the holiday, so I began to research it more in depth than that. And there are several historians that have written about the holiday, and in seeing its immensity and its great depth, its great spirituality, I was deeply moved by the holiday. Here is a pen, a medallion that people were giving out for the Seneca Village, Pinkster rebirth in Seneca Village in 1997 from the New York Historical Society. And this medallion, this button, 1997, shows you how long I had been involved with Pinkster.
Right. Well, one of the questions I'd like to ask you on that, with Pinkster, and you said Seneca Village, is there a lot of documentation on that?
Yes, there is. There is in many of the museums, the New York Historical Society, many of papers and eyewitnesses, the annals of Albany and such. There was a poem that was written for the Pinkster King, and Eileen Southern has a copy of, well, she has the frontispiece of the poem. It was in honor of, leaping ahead of myself, because Africans had elected a king of Pinkster for each year, the festival.
Right.
And so here it is. I don't know if you can see it on your camera too well. I'll read it to you. It's a Pinkster ode for the year 1803, most respectfully dedicated to Carolus Africanus Rex, Charles, King of Africa, thus rendered in English, King Charles, Captain General, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Pinkster Boys, by His Majesty's obedient servant, Absalom Amewell, Esquire, and this seems to be a pseudonym for the man's name. And this was in Albany, printed solely for the purchasers and others, 1803. So the poem is online too. The entire poem, it reads like Longfellow in part, and in part it's almost like the current events of the day of 1803, and they're talking about that new purchase of that new large piece of land that President Jefferson just got, Louisiana, and it talks about all the people that celebrated with the African king of Pinkster, including people of Vermont, because at one time Vermont was a part of New York. So it's a very, very interesting poem.
Well, you've given us a lot of information, but basically, what is Pinkster?
Yes. Pinkster is the Dutch term for Pentecost, and Pentecost is 50 days after Easter. So as Easter leaps around, Pinkster or Pentecost leaps around. Now, there are two Pentecosts. There is the European Pentecost, or Pinkster as the Dutch would call it, and there was an African one. The African one goes back to the empire of the Congo, and the kingdoms across the river from Congo that were more vassal states that were known as the Angolas. Angola means highborn person, king and queen. They had a Christianity that was going back to the 15th century to the 1400s under the Congo Mbanza. And their Christianity was a mixture of Catholicism and Bantu belief systems. And there was an interesting syncretism between the two belief systems. The Bantu system was very, very ancient African, consisted of a belief in what was known as the Congolese cosmogram. I don't know if you can see it very clear. It was a cross in a circle. And that cross in a circle was the cardinal movements of the sun. The sun's rising would be in Toro, or rising around on the earth, and then it was in Sulu, the sky, at noon, when the sun was at its highest, and then it would descend beneath the earth or beneath the water, or what was known as the Kalunga line. This was the region of the dead, the Kalunga line, separated living from the dead. And then it went to the world of the dead, or the world of the ancestors, called the Insi Afwa, where it was the midnight sun. And so they believed that this was the whole understanding of the world from every day, and the whole understanding of the cosmos. God was called Nzambi, and Nzambi was the sky god. And and again, the sun was not Nzambi. The sun was the lantern of Nzambi, and Nzambi would hold court at high noon for everyone, and the sun would be bright in the sky, and then Nzambi would hold court in the land of the dead with the midnight sun, and with the ancestors. And so the Kalunga line and the line between the land of the dead and the land of the living formed a cross. And so at the crossroads, they felt that that was a very special symbol, and that's when they would have an altar prepared.
We just witnessed some exciting information about Pinkster. Now we're going to go to a break, and we'll be right back.
We are having a celebration on Memorial Day, May 25th, at Grant's Tomb, in remembrance of those forgotten units that fought in the Civil War, and that will be from 12 to 4. We have exhibits of people who are going to reenact what it was like to live in a Union encampment and Civil War dress. And then there'll be a celebration from 2 to 4 in which Keith Wright and other elected officials will be there. There'll be songs of the Civil War and just a remembrance of these troops. And then the final day is the Pinkster Celebration itself at the African Burial Ground, high noon, on Saturday, May 30th. And that's our big celebration.
I already knew that I was going to go to college, from a young age. I definitely want to major in political science, become the mayor or something, make the situation better for other people. My name is Justin, and I am your dividend.
Welcome to Carol's Journey. Today's guest is Dr. John Norvell, the director. Let me read this off. The director of the African American Pinkster Committee of New York. Dr. Norvell, we're going to continue our conversation. One of the things I'd like to ask you, who are the participants in Pinkster? Who are your sponsors?
Oh, well, our sponsors are the African Burial Ground people, and also Assemblyman Keith Wright has been very, very helpful in the week's events that are leading up to Pinkster. We've also been greatly helped by Melissa Margarito, and these people are our, as we call them, our patrons with Pinkster and that. But I want to get back to something.
Yes.
We were talking about the African side of Pinkster.
Right.
What happened, which was so interesting, was the beliefs of the Congolese became superimposed with Catholic beliefs. Prince Henry the Navigator was traveling around Africa trying to find a way to the east, and they stumbled upon the Congo. And when they heard these stories of the Congolese belief, they thought they had gotten to Ethiopia, which they felt if they got to Ethiopia, that was easier to go across the Indian Ocean to India. But they found they hadn't, but the beliefs was so moving that they got back to the Pope at that time, and this is, again, the 1400s. And what happened was a syncretism of what was Catholicism and Bantu beliefs. It was called the Congolese Rite. And really simply what it was at the crossroads that I spoke about, the cross was superimposed, the crucifix was superimposed on the crossroads. But with this, the Congolese emperors and the Angolan kings had great power, particularly Congolese emperors. They were virtually made the surrogate popes of Central and Southern Africa. They could form their own catechism, as they did under Alfonso the Great. They consecrated their own priests, who were called Nganga. God was still called in the old way Nzambi. They added a new term, Nzambi Malapwe, which meant great God or great God Almighty. How many times have African Americans have said that?
That's right.
And with that was a syncretism that occurred during slavery with the Islamic beliefs of further Bambaran Africa, which had Allah Akbar, God is great. So together those beliefs became combined. The Congolese And Angolans were very important in being cultural catalysts throughout the Americas. And they combined what was Islamic beliefs with their beliefs, with the Yoruba beliefs of the Orishas, and that the Orishas becoming saints, and in fact the head of the religious belief of the Yoruba, Oluran, or Oluran, which meant Lord. They call Oluran in Zambi, which is what? Lord God. And this was related to, again, the Catholic term Patrum Omnipotentem, again, Father Almighty. So this was a cauldron of a great synthesis of beliefs in that. And it was, but there's always trouble in paradise.
Right.
And the trouble with the Portuguese was that as Columbus so-called discovered America in 1492, his son began slaving. And in 1502, the first slaves were brought to the Americas, to Santo Domingo, from Africa. And, well, they might have been really from Spain. But in any case, what happened was the Portuguese started slaving. And the Manacongo emperors and Angolans were so picked upon, they wrote to the Pope and said, they're stealing our people. And the popes at first excommunicated the Portuguese rulers, but with the union of Portugal and Spain, with the power of the Habsburg Empire in Europe, which everybody feared the Habsburgs, and the Habsburgs had deposed some popes, and that the popes stopped answering the calls and demands of the Congolese emperors. And so the Congolese and the Angolans joined an alliance with the Dutch. The Dutch were fighting for their independence against Spain, because at the time, Holland was called the Spanish Netherlands. And so the Dutch joined in this alliance against the Spanish and the Portuguese in this global war that took place in the early 1600s. And so we get to the story where there were these 11 Angolans. Well, many of them are Congolese, some were Angolans. They were on the Angolan side of the Congo River, like, being on the New Jersey side of the Hudson River. And they were in the right place, but at the wrong time. The Portuguese stole these people and put them aboard a slave ship headed for Bahia, Brazil. The Dutch stopped the slave ship, and the Dutch took the people off the ship. But instead of being good allies and bring the people back to where they came from, the Dutch said, oh, we can use these servants for our colony in the north, New Amsterdam, or as it is today, New York. And so the black community of New York began in 1626 with these 11 Angolans. These 11 Angolans brought the Pinkster, or Pentecost tradition with them that the Dutch called Pinkster. But what did they added something? They added the election of a king, because they remembered how the king, or the Manacongo, or the Angola, which meant king or queen, brought the people together as a united community. And so you had a king of Africa. He might have been called Angola. That was a major part of the Pinkster Celebration. He was inaugurated at that time. He was a master drummer, and they had these circular dances, or counterclockwise dances, that symbolized the cosmogram. And they had those dances at City Hall Park, what was known as the Commons down then, at that time,
right,
and in Albany on Pinkster Hill, where the cemetery of Africans were, which is now the site of the state capitol of Albany. It was built on top of another African burial ground, in which there is no marker, no memorial, anything there. But the celebrations always started with burial grounds in New York. In Manhattan, it started with the African burial ground with the Pinkster King, and then there was a procession from that to City Hall, right, and there they would have the counterclockwise dances, which everybody realized was of religious significance. And that was the beginnings of the Pinkster festivals, which went on for a whole week in all of New York State, up and down the Hudson and up and down Long Island. The holiday was of such importance that it spread throughout the Middle Atlantic states. It spread to New Jersey, it spread to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia had the holiday, Newark had the holiday, Trenton had the holiday. It spread down to Maryland, and so it was called the Great Saturnalia of North American Blacks by James Fenimore Cooper in a short story about Pinkster that was called Satan's Toe. The New England community also wanted Pinkster. Vermont was a part of New York at the time, so Vermont was celebrating Pinkster. But the New England community also wanted Pinkster, the black community of New England. And the Puritans said, no, it smelled too much of popery on the one hand, and the other hand, it looked like it was African heathenism. But the black community was relentless, and the Puritans, fearing maybe an alliance between the black community and the Native American community, and there were these wars with the Native American community, they figured, well, maybe it's safe to incorporate some of these ideas of Pinkster, but not call it Pinkster. So the Puritan communities of Connecticut and Massachusetts and Rhode Island and New Hampshire decided to let the black communities elect their kings, and so they call it Election Day. Same time as Pinkster, May or June, but they call it Election Day in the great tradition of the town hall where you elect things and elect people. So the kings were actually called kings in New Hampshire, but in Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts, they were called governors. And Election Day was a big, big holiday in Boston in the early antebellum years, just as big as Pinkster was in New York. And so you have the spreading of this holiday, Pinkster or Election Day, from Maine was a part of Massachusetts, all the way down to Maryland, when the country of the United States became a country. And when New York was the capital of the United States, and then afterwards Philadelphia, Pinkster was in its full flower. So you have half of the nation at that time, all the way down to the Potomac, celebrating Pinkster. To the north and in the south, there were other celebrations. And there's now a need for research to find out whether the early days of Washington, D.C. were also days in which Pinkster was celebrated.
Yeah, why do you think Pinkster virtually disappeared?
Oh, yes, that's a very important question.
Very.
Well, because the Pinkster King of New York, Charles, as he was called, gained too much power. He was the champion of the community, of the black community. Believe it or not, in those early days, the Dutch days, you could sue a slave master for mistreatment or for not giving you a land grant, because at that early time, after 7 years, you were given a land grant. It was indentured servitude. Then, as slavery became much more cruel and much more ossified, Peter Stuyvesant was the last Dutch governor to, in fact, he wanted to do away with all these things. He wanted to make New York the center of the slave market for the North Atlantic. And so there were no more land grants, and so slavery became more brutal and harsh. He was usurped from his position by the British in 1664. And the British slavery was harsh, very cruel, and is what became what people know the brutality of slavery as it is in literature. New York was a slave state. New York City was a major slave center. And so it was only exceeded by Charleston, not by very much. And the Pinkster King was still there to defend people and defend the community. Native Americans became looking towards the Pinkster King, the Lenape people, who were also enslaved because they were dark. And then the indentured white servants began to look towards the Pinkster King, and that was trouble for New York. That's when he had to be deposed, and the holiday had to be outlawed.
Dr. Norvell, this conversation is interesting, but I would like to know about some of the activities, if you can talk about that very briefly.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have, I understand you have something on the 29th, the 28th, and the 30th of May.
Yes. Well, Pinkster, in its greatest extent, was celebrated for a week. And so we are attempting to bring back like a week's activities. This is a year, though, of incredible anniversaries. This year, 2015, is the 150th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. And another little known fact is the black troops, the colored troops of New York that fought in that Civil War, the 20th, the 26th, and the 30th and the 31st regiments. And so we are having a celebration on Memorial Day, May 25th, at Grant's Tomb, in remembrance of those forgotten units that fought in the Civil War. And that will be from 12 to 4. We have exhibits of people who are going to reenact what it was like to live in a Union encampment and Civil War dress. And then there'll be a celebration from 2 to 4 in which Keith Wright and other elected officials will be there. and there'll be songs of the Civil War and just a remembrance of these troops. There's a plaque, in fact, at Union Square Station and 14th Street. When you come out of the station, you'll see a plaque that was put there in the ground dedicated to the 26th Regiment, and when they presented the colors, and the colors will be presented to Assemblyman Wright and I believe to Congressman Rangel at the event. One should remember that the Civil War was continuing even after Lincoln was assassinated. The Civil War didn't end until Juneteenth, and that's when, again, these soldiers liberated the people in Texas, those who were enslaved. The next event will be on Friday, May 29th, at the Harlem State Office Building, Adam Clayton Powell State Office Building, the 8th floor from 5 to 9. This is bringing back in the tradition and spirit of the African king of Pinks who cared for the community. We're having the state of Black New York, and in this particular issue, we're going to discuss the 2020 census. It's a very, very serious issue because the categories are such as if to erase the numbers of African peoples and peoples of African descent from the demographics in the United States. Low numbers of African Americans mean that all the programs for youth and for seniors and everything will be stopped, will be eliminated, because the point will be made there are hardly any African Americans in the United States. They all got absorbed. And so it's the way the questions are being handled that is troubling. And the Afro-Latino community brought this to the attention of everyone back in October. So we're continuing this whole segment with the Friday. And then the final day is the Pinkster Celebration itself at the African Burial Ground, high noon, on Saturday, May 30th. And that's our big celebration.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us here at Carol Journey TV. I certainly got an education on Pinkster. I hope to have you back again so we can continue our conversation, because I'm particularly interested in the Pinksters during slavery time. Mm-hmm. And that's something I'm particularly interested in, and how that whole thing was settled between the slaveholders, the slaves, because many of the slaves were obviously practicing or wanted to practice Pinkster. Mm-hmm. But thank you very much, Dr. Norvell.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to thank the audience here. I want to thank you for joining us here at Carol Journey TV. And we can be found at Carol Journey TV YouTube, Facebook, and we're on most of the social medias. Now, this particular broadcast will be seen on YouTube, and we feel that it's very, very important to attend some of the events that Dr. Norvell has talked about, particularly the one dealing with our censored. Thank you very much for joining Carol Journey TV.